Welcome to another episode of Just Because Live. I'm Chris Nicolason, and today I'm honored to be joined by Adrian Olson. Adrian, thanks for coming on the show today.
It's great to be here.
Perfect. And Adrian, usually I'm like Adrian Olson of blank, but you've got an interesting story that we're actually going to give your ofs here in a minute because you've got a couple of them.
Mhm.
So before we give those away, what I want you to do is kind of just tell some people about yourself a little bit, where you're from and kind of, and who you are and how you ended up here in Colorado Springs.
Sure. Yeah. So it's great. Again, great to be here. Thanks for having me. So I actually am from Wyoming. My family is all up there, although we've kind of dispersed a little bit across the United States.
Yep.
But that's where I grew up, Cheyenne, Wyoming. And wound up in Colorado by way of Kansas City.
Okay.
My wife and I have been married about 20 years, and we got married and moved to Kansas City because that's where she grew up and lived there for about 8 years, and really just felt a call to get back to the Mountain West. And I actually accepted a position 12 years ago that brought me to Colorado Springs with a Christian media company.
Oh, nice.
Right here in Colorado Springs, ordered here. And and then, just kind of I have kind of a couple of different things that we'll talk about here today, but my brother-in-law started a whiskey distillery about 5 years ago up in Wyoming, and I ultimately wound up starting a little distribution company that I know we'll talk a little bit more about. But then also on top of that, my full-time day job is actually working for a nonprofit, and I started working for them a couple of years ago, nonprofit that helps sex trafficking victims. So yeah, I'm an engineer, math degree person. Have my wife Kimberly. She's an accountant at an accounting firm here in the Springs. So yeah, and one son, 7 years old.
Very cool. And so you said too, you came here by way of Kansas City. So are you a Chiefs fan, or have you are you a Broncos fan? Like, where do you kind of fall within those?
It's kind of interesting. I'm a Royals fan and a Broncos fan.
Okay, nice. So
kind of split. Yeah, I do go for the Rockies, but when the Rockies and the Royals play each other, I started following baseball before the Rockies existed, and so the Royals were the closest team.
Gotcha.
But no, I am absolutely in no way a Chiefs fan.
There we go. Fair enough. No, I heard somebody the other day too talking about the Rockies, and they were just like, you can tell they're a newer team because purple is their, one of their main colors, and exactly. Purple right off the get-go. But no, I'm a Nationals fan and a Capitals fan, and so it's one of those things. Like when the Nats come out, I'm definitely there. But even now with the Capitals being out, I watched the Avs play last night, so I know that duality of being in state with a team that's not actually your chosen team.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit then too, because I was telling you offline that I'm pretty sure you and I met actually at the liquor store on Costco, at the Costco on Barnes and Powers.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's where Tracy, our client happiness coordinator, met up with you. And can you tell people kind of what you were doing that day, and then
Sure.
we'll kind of go from there?
Yeah, so I was actually that was a tasting that we were doing of my family's whiskey. It's called Arcola whiskey.
Okay.
And yeah, we I can talk a little bit about the business and what we do if now's a good time. But we're a small niche distribution company, liquor distribution company, and we actually started in the middle of COVID-19. I actually got my permits to distribute like right before everything happened. It was March of 2020. And one of the things that I realized very quickly, because I learned a lot, I was learning every single day for 6 months, making a lot of good mistakes. So one of the things I learned very quickly is for unknown new products in a crowded market, which Colorado is very crowded. It's really important to do to get sips to lips, to give people a taste of the product so that they can enjoy it and then take a bottle home with them. I don't actually get to do that very often. It was kind of cool that we got to meet. I have some people that help me with that stuff, but sometimes people are unavailable, and so every once in a while I have to jump in and pinch hit as the business owner. So that was really cool that we got connected like that. But that's what we do. We try to get as often as possible into stores that will let us do tastings so that we can actually get exposure of these products. It's the best organic marketing that exists. So
I love it. I love the idea because I worked in retail for a long time, and so the idea of sips to lips, but this it's that ownership piece, right?
Exactly.
I worked in clothing retail. It was always the thing of, it's not just looking at the product. So, when you walk into a liquor store, I can look at the bottle,
Yep.
But, so if I get somebody in the retail store to actually try the product on, to feel it, to touch it, it gives them that piece of ownership.
Yep.
You really want them to have.
And really kind of the niche for my company, I like to say I'm the equivalent of like a craft brewery, only on the distribution side. I work with small mom and pop brands,
Nice.
largely in Wyoming. And I'm really picky on what I take into my lineup, because
Right.
I have to do tastings, and I want the person who's standing there to enjoy what they're tasting, so that they turn into a long-term customer.
Right.
Yeah, I get to represent great brands. Arcola whiskey, Jackson Hole Still Works from Jackson, Wyoming. Big Lost Meadery, which is from Gillette, Wyoming. Farmstead Cider, which is from Jackson Hole again.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have a vodka company down in Houston, Dash Vodka, that we help distribute here. And then Durango Craft Spirits from right here in Colorado, down in Durango. So
very cool.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit then too about Arcola, because we talked a little bit that you can actually, because not only is it, one that you guys distribute for, but it's also a family business, right?
Exactly. That's right.
And so I think you've probably got a little bit of insight then too, or some kind of knowledge on, the Arcola spirits themselves. So can you kind of talk about that? Because I find it, as somebody that's a bourbon fan, I find it fascinating, like the process and things like that, and what actually goes into it, instead of just being something that you just kind of throw in a bottle and say, here you go.
Yeah, I have really gone through a cool learning curve on how hard it is to be a distiller. My brother-in-law, Mike, and my sister, Michelle, actually started the business about 5 years ago. They're east of Cheyenne, Wyoming, probably about 15 miles in this little town called Carpenter.
Okay.
And the cool thing about Arcola is that it is actually the smallest legal distillery in North America.
Oh, interesting.
Legal being the key word there, of course.
Yep.
But he does it in this little, it's like a 12 by 14 or 12 by 16 foot operation. And he's an efficiency freak. I mean, he per cubic inch kicks out probably the most whiskey of any distillery in the US. It's really, really cool. And he works very hard to keep up with us. He actually will work his days in, 24 to 36 hour chunks, because it takes a long time to do a run through those stills.
Yeah.
And so he works very, very hard, and it's a fascinating science. It really is science.
Right.
And so it's a bourbon mash, what we make. It's 61, the grain bill on it is 61% corn, 19% oat, and 20% barley. And then we age it on white oak, number 4 char white oak.
Okay.
We're working on some longer bottle and bond products right now, but at the moment, we're sitting at about 18 to 20 months of age on that number 4 char alligator char white oak.
Yep.
And it's really cool. It's handmade. I mean, the whole thing is handmade start to finish. It is a true grain to glass product, and everything from the mashing of the grains, the distillation, the aging, the bottling, putting the labels on. I helped them bottle a couple of weeks ago, and the only thing they trusted me to do is put the tax band on the bottle. So, I guess they think I'm sales. I can't actually do the important part, but they do it all by hand. It's really fascinating.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting, because my daughter is going to school out in Louisville, Kentucky. And when we took her out at first, we did a tour of, the Bullet. It's the Bullet Pappy Van Winkle distillery. My guess is they've got a much bigger operation, obviously, and it's not all of it is being done by hand. They showed us some of the older stills that they had and things like that. And so I found that part of it where you're talking about it being science is you're absolutely spot on.
Mm-hmm.
There's a technical aspect that goes into something.
Yep.
Something like that it's super fascinating.
It is, and it's just fascinating when you're that small and you're hand making everything. I mean, it's little things, and these things impact large distilleries too, but the barometric pressure impacts how much comes out of the still, and it's like things like that you never think about. It is truly a science. So
interesting. So then talk to me too, then with Arcola, do they have, because one of the trends I've seen with certain bourbons is different flavor mixtures, things like that, combinations or what have you. Do they have any certain ones right now that they're working with or experimenting with or selling?
Yeah, we're working with some new recipes for sure. I mean, we've got a rum recipe in kind of the R&D stage
nice.
right now.
Nice. Yeah.
We've got a spelt whiskey, which is an ancient grain whiskey that we're working on right now. It's delicious. We've got a cask strength version of Arcola that's actually finished on mesquite wood that we're working on. Just really, really fun, delicious products. But the cool thing on the flavor profile, and I meant to mention this earlier, that really sets Arcola apart. I mean, we sell a lot of it at tastings, and the reason why is it's the way that he actually makes it. He uses a direct fired pot still. There's not very many direct fired distilleries left in the US. It's kind of the ancient method of distillation where you literally have a fire hitting the bottom of the kettle to create the distillation.
Oh, wow.
You get like a layer of caramelization of the grain sugars in that mash, and it brings out a butterscotch caramel, like peach kind of note that's really dominant at the front. It's a very delicious, unique, and smooth whiskey. So,
very cool.
Yeah.
And so obviously you've got Arcola, and then you mentioned some others as well. And you're a distributor here in Colorado. Can you kind of tell everyone too kind of where right now your reach is hit within the state of Colorado?
Yeah, I mean, we starting kind of grassroots, and I've got a small team of people that help me. But we actually go pretty much from New Mexico to Wyoming on I-25 corridor. The Denver market's the one we've been working on as of late. Absolutely. But we're all over North Colorado. We're all over the Springs, Pueblo, even all the way down to Trinidad.
Oh, cool.
And then we also go west on the 160 corridor out to like Durango, Telluride area as well. So we've got a pretty big footprint for as small of a team as we are. So
that's cool. And then with somebody that's got and this is me from like a business standpoint too, with somebody that has both a full-time job and doing this distribution on the side.
Yeah.
Talk to me about, and you just mentioned, you've got a team that, will go up through the state. What things are important to you then as you're kind of building your team out, and you talked about like mistakes that you've made back in the beginning, and you and I could have a whole talk, like an hour-long conversation about that. Like, so as you kind of progress now a few years out into this, what things do you look for team members? What things within your, the business, the distribution business have been things where you're like, these things are really important to me as we're kind of going out and about, because it's not just a static office that you're in.
Right.
You're actually saying, here, guys, go on out there, but represent the company and the standards that we have.
As I'm sure you and all your viewers know, COVID has thrown a mighty, mighty wrench into finding people. And so, what I look for, this is kind of taking my distribution hat off, putting my leadership hat, because I have a, lengthy, experience in leadership and development of people.
Yeah.
I really don't necessarily care if somebody has experience.
Right.
When you have good products in your lineup, I really want somebody who's going to do what they say they're going to do and be able to learn and be able to follow the procedures, the procedures for putting contacts into our CRM, follow the procedures for following up with accounts on a regular interval. I mean, the thing about us being as small as we are, we can have great products, but if we're the one and done distribution company that shows up into an account, makes a sale and never shows up again, we've blown our shot with that account. True. And so you need somebody who's consistent and who can actually do the follow-up and be in there and just be proactive. So I would say certainly teachable, learnable, but just somebody who has integrity that does what they say they're going to do. Those are the two biggest things that I look for in somebody coming onto my team for this particular job. Yeah,
absolutely. Very cool. Yeah, because it's a thing too where I have there's an attorney that I know out of Florida who wrote a book called "You Can't Teach Hungry." But I've actually thought even through COVID and once COVID hit, and as we've kind of had people here and people have left, but it's one of those things too where there should actually be another book called "You Can't Teach Buy-In." It's also that thing of like having buy-in in a way because of the product that they're selling. That there is that integrity piece of like, this is who I am, this is what I do.
Absolutely.
That shows up. And I think it's one of those interesting things that I think it's almost an inherent, either heart thing or gut thing that people just have within them.
Yep.
Okay, this is how I'm going to show up each day.
Absolutely.
And so it's interesting. Okay. So like I said, you've got multiple ofs. And so I want to shift to your primary, job and what you do, each day. And just because I think it's important enough too, that I want to spend the majority of the rest of the time we have talking about that.
It's good.
So tell people what you do for your day job. And then I want to kind of get a history of it a bit. And then we'll talk about too how people in the community can help and that. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, it's funny. I never thought that I would actually be doing this distribution thing.
Yeah.
It was really just my brother-in-law pestering me for multiple years to get into Colorado, and me finally relenting.
Right.
But I do have a full-time day job. I work for a company called Rescue America, and what we do is we actually run a 24/7 hotline. We rescue, revive, and empower victims of sexual exploitation. So we actually have a 24/7 rescue hotline that victims can actually call, and we will get them out of their exploitative situation. And one thing I'm frequently asked is, well, the National Human Trafficking Hotline, great people, but how are you different from the National Human Trafficking Hotline? And really a big difference between us and them. Again, great partners of ours, but they resource. They're a tip hotline. They also will resource victims if they call, give them resources. But if somebody's actually calling them and saying, I want out of my exploitive situation,
Right.
they're not equipped to help them with that. So they send them to partners. They send them to us, for example. We're one of the people that they refer to. So we're actually a boots on the ground organization, kind of acting like a broker between the street, the life of commercial sexual exploitation, and freedom ultimately.
Yeah.
So, and it's funny because I was telling you, Christopher, before we started the broadcast here, my goal is to spend as little time on the distribution side as possible, because this is my passion. This is my full-time job. And I do have the company. I started the company, and I spend some time on the company. But my goal is to hand off the reins of the company to somebody else and, just continue on this. I get asked all the time, so you're going to grow this thing up and do the distribution full time? And that is absolutely not my goal. I just want to do this distribution to help, my family and get it off the ground, get it going here in Colorado, get these small brands represented well. But really, my passion through and through is helping these people. What people don't understand is trafficking. We're a domestically focused anti-trafficking organization.
Right.
Trafficking is happening everywhere. It's all over Colorado Springs. It's all over Denver. It's all over. And people don't realize that. And it's a lot of what we do.
That's one thing I was going to ask you, because it's like, it's the, like we hear about trafficking happening, like where they're taken, overseas or, other areas. But you're telling me then too, that it's actually truly just kind of, as you and I are talking right now, it's happening within the Springs. It's happening, and even domestically, like just this close to home.
Yep.
Day in, day out.
Yep. Yeah. I actually saw, it's funny. I was, on a conference call for Rescue America, and I had to run to the pharmacy down the street from my house. And right next to that pharmacy in the same shopping plaza was a massage parlor. And as I was sitting there on my Rescue America call, finishing that, waiting to go into the drugstore,
right.
I was watching trafficking happening right before my eyes in that massage parlor.
Wow.
And that's when it really hit me. That was probably actually about 18 months ago. And that's when I was like, oh my goodness, it's here. And I've actually got a passion to get our operations fully launched here in Colorado Springs. We have a great footprint in Denver. We're really a national organization. We're equipped to serve people anywhere in the U.S. We started in Houston, but there are focus areas where we really, mobilize and engage the community. And I do have a passion for Colorado Springs getting into this fight and helping us solve it. So
and it's definitely a thing too, where I hear it in your voice, where it's the impact that you're having on people in their lives is, you can feel, what you're doing can be have a far-reaching effect.
Absolutely.
And do you find then too that it's primarily, do you see it happening more in larger cities, from what your guys' data shows, or is it something too where even in smaller towns and things like that, it's just happening, but it's just on a smaller level and it's just quieter there, in those areas?
Yeah. That's a great question. It's truly happening everywhere.
Yeah.
But the way that it's happening is different in cities than it is in rural areas. So, for example, in a major city, Denver, Colorado Springs, there are trafficking fronts all over the city.
Right.
But if you're in a more rural area, it's more happening like on the interstate highways.
Oh, okay.
Right? Truck stops and things like that. So it just looks a little bit different, but it is truly everywhere.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
And then, so some of the ways too that you guys help is, can you talk about we were talking before this about ways that Rescue America actually can can help. So once somebody calls in, kind of what happens after that?
Sure. Yeah, it's we try to make the process as minimal for the survivor who's calling us as possible, because they're usually in a traumatic situation, right?
Right.
Most survivors have PTSD, anxiety, and depression rates that are on par with war veterans.
Okay.
And so they call us, we do a quick intake. That's a volunteer position. And I can talk more about volunteer roles that we offer in a bit too, but that's a volunteer position that does a quick intake. And really what they're trying to do is get their basic information and do a quick assessment of their situation. Are they in a safe location? For example, what is their drug of choice? We're trying to figure out if there's addiction problems in place and things like that we have to know as we're exiting them. That doesn't mean we're not going to help them. We just need to know it going in. So we go through a quick intake, that's probably 5 to 10 minutes. And then at the end of that call, there's a really kind of a pivotal moment at the end where the volunteer makes a decision as to whether or not this person is truly ready to take a next step towards freedom. And at that point, if they feel that is true of this particular person who's calling, they will escalate it to a next level. And that is a paid staff position at Rescue America. It's called an exit strategist. And that person will then reach out to the survivor. It's usually like 10 to 15 minutes, that we'll call them back. And we literally walk them through planning their exit. Sometimes it's simple. Sometimes it's really complicated. We had a survivor once in Seattle who was standing at a window, and we guided her through getting out of the building, going to the nearest 7-Eleven, arranging for an Uber to pick her up, getting her to the airport, getting her on a plane to one of our partner shelters. We had a survivor that we served a couple months ago. It took 119 touch points before she was ready to go. When you look at the trauma of the population, it can be very lengthy, but sometimes it can be quick too. We have some that it's just a couple of touch points and we get them out of their situation. We actually we partner with Southwest Airlines. They're a great partner of ours. They actually donate flights to victims, and they have helped us overcome a lot of barriers with the FAA and TSA to actually transport victims without IDs, because victims typically don't have IDs, because that's one of the things that their traffickers do to keep them, is they'll take their IDs and everything from them. And then they also will notify the flight crew that there's a survivor on board, so they can kind of take extra care. So they're a great partner of ours.
Good. Oh, that's great. So then after that, so we have, I always look at it, from our business standpoint, I look at it as you have the before unit, which is right with the intake side. You have the during unit, so up to the call and the rescue. And then you've got the after unit. So after the rescue happens, there's obviously, it's not just, we've gotten you out of this situation, have fun with your life and move on. So what happens after that time?
Great question. So we actually, there's a stage on the anti-landscaping continuum called emergency assessment or emergency care. And basically what that is, the goal of an emergency care program, and it can vary based upon the program, but it's between, 60, 90 days, somewhere in there. The goal of that program is to literally address the immediate things that are pulling a survivor back into the life. So you're really wanting to address their PTSD, anxiety, depression rates, substance abuse issues, all of those things that can actually be a lure or a hook for somebody to go back into the life. And that's literally what the goal of an emergency assessment program is to just kind of mitigate those factors. And we partner with emergency care programs all over the United States. We actually have 8 what we consider preferred partners, where we go in and we do an extensive vetting process on their program, and we look at everything in detail. So we have about somewhere around 40 beds across the United States that we use. And then, across eight partners, which is great, because it's great that we have Southwest Airlines, because it actually saves us a lot of money, because we are transporting victims regularly through the air. So,
and I want to talk for a minute too, because the idea of the intake side of it, obviously there's checkbox questions that they have to have, but I do think, with what you all do at Rescue America, there's also a certain skills. So what kind of qualities does a volunteer who's actually doing an intake, what kind of qualities do they have to have? Because I don't think it's just any person that you could just pluck off the street to volunteer to kind of take an intake like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's one of the many hats that I wear at Rescue America is the mobilization and volunteer area. And so it's funny. We have really good training and we train and equip people. But, you know, in order to really come and help us in any capacity, somebody has to be called to this fight. That is number one, because it is hard. You're going to hear some really gut wrenching stories from people, from these victims. And so that's number one. They have to be called to the fight. If they are not, they will not last very long, whether it's staff or volunteer. And then again, like I said before, looking for somebody who's moldable and trainable, because our training prepares them. If they're called to it, then we train them and we equip them. Obviously, you know, you need somebody who has that nice balance of empathy, because you need to empathize with what they're going through. But sometimes when you're dealing with a traumatized population, you do have to be like, this is what is best for you. You need to do this. So there's a balance between that firmness and that empathy side that we really look for, and as we vet our volunteer and staff positions.
Interesting. And then I have another question for you too, because when I first started out as an attorney, I did family law, but then I was doing some protection orders as well. And I know you and I talked about a different aspect of the legal side, but with this piece, do you ever see it to where like there are protection orders being filed from the survivor against, you know, the people that have brought them in, just so that there is some sort of a protection piece? Or is it more like a witness protection piece where it's like out of sight, you know what I mean? Just like a barrier created that way.
That's a great question. We don't actually get exposed to a lot of that, because we are just the broker between them and that emergency care piece and long term. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, we do get involved with that, but that's more things that our partners deal with. And then the one thing that, you know, you bring up a really good point, Christopher, that one of the kind of strategies of actually getting them out of their area is it's a physical barrier, not only for them to go back, but it's also a physical barrier for their trafficker to come after them. It's like, it is, and this is a sad reality, but it is easier to lure a new victim into the life than it is to go after somebody who has left you. So, and that kind of, I know we only have so much time, but that dovetails into, you know, how do people start getting trafficked in the first place? You know, and we can obviously spend time on that, but, you know, just the one thing that I would tell you, if you're a parent out there, it's social media. It's Instagram. It's people coming up out of nowhere and telling your child everything that they want to hear. 1 in 3 teens that run away from home are actually in trafficking within 48 hours. So it's literally their pool is social media.
Interesting. So then I've got 2 daughters myself that are older, but as a parent yourself, like what advice then, or kind of, you know, within trainings or other things, you know, would you give to people out there that are like, you know, what advice would you give to people to say, hey, this is how we can prevent some of these things? Absolutely.
I mean, generally speaking, the way to prevent is to be proactive in the lives of your children. They're coming after your children. Know what your children are doing. And, you know, we're not an awareness organization. However, if you actually go to rescueamerica.ngo and sign up for our newsletter, I also wear the hat of communications director for Rescue America. And we actually do provide a lot of resources on our website and through our regular communications that we have with our audience, just about how to prevent it, you know, how to protect your kids on social media and all of that. That's not what we do as our mission, but it's something that we try to incorporate into our communications flow. But there's a lot of great organizations out there that are doing awareness work, and I would encourage your audience to look at those as well, because there's definitely, once you start seeing that it's everywhere, it does make you think differently about your children and your children's behaviors and all of that. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. And so obviously there's a passion that you have here with what you do day in and day out. And they always talk about in any like business or entrepreneurial book that I've read is like, you know, find your passion, because if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And so talk about, like, and you mentioned it earlier, talk about, you know, being called to a job and kind of what day in and day out for this, because it's a rough thing. It's a tough thing. I mean, it's not just walking in like selling flowers or anything like that. Like, you're dealing with some hard stuff here. So it's
not like selling whiskey.
Correct. Absolutely. And so what did you thought about each day?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I'm a believer in Jesus, and I have a clear call to this work. It's just one of those things that God made very clear to me, that this is something that I am supposed to do with my life. And when you're following your calling, and it can be different. It can be being an attorney, right? It can be being a CPA, whatever. When you're following your calling, that doesn't mean that you still don't have bad days. It doesn't mean that you're still not exposed to things that you wish you weren't.
Right.
But what I try to always look at is the outcomes, right? Serving 350 sex trafficking victims on our hotline last year and hearing the stories of impact of somebody who, I got the opportunity to sit in front of a survivor that we served like 3 years ago, a couple months ago, and to hear her on the other side, going to beauty school completely free of all of that. It's that's what gets you out of bed in the morning. But the other thing, and it is cool, I don't spend a ton of time on my side hustle, but doing that type of work, like the tasting where we met, that's also like, it kind of can take your mind off of the darkness on those hard days too, so,
it's called, my first year as an attorney, I waited tables at night at a restaurant that I had worked prior to law school. And I remember, so during the day, I'd have these hard cases, where people are getting divorced or other things like that are happening. And then I'd go and I'd wait tables. And the people that worked there solely full time, they'd have hard days. They'd be, upset, or emotions would be going. And I'm just like, this is great. Like, we're just selling wine. We're giving people dessert. This is so nice compared to what I did during the day. And I completely understand where you're coming from with that. Like, it definitely is something that takes your mind off of things. And it's just such a nice, easy thing to do, of like, here, try this nice, try this nice bourbon mash, and you'll have a good night. Everything will be fine. And so, no, I know exactly where you're coming from. Well, Adrian, we're a little past the half an hour mark, so I do want to honor your time.
Absolutely.
I did put the rescueamerica.ngo site up. And then where can people find your group here, find the distribution group? Where are you guys going to be at? Do you have any spots that you're going to be coming up here soon?
Yeah, actually, we're going to be at the Costco and Barnes and Powers on Friday, and then we're going to be out at Falcon Liquor Outlet on Saturday, and that'll be probably one of my staff, one of my folks that'll be out there doing those. But come see us and check out our website that's in beta right now. It's called ascentdistro.com. It's literally in beta, so if there's bugs, I'm sorry in advance. It just launched, but check it out, ascentdistro.com. And again, on the Rescue America side, I have a passion for bringing this and bringing a focus to this in the Springs. Go to our website, check it out, look at our volunteer opportunities. We didn't have time here. We only talked about one. We have a lot of different volunteer opportunities for both men and women to get involved, and they're very tangible. And so, and obviously we're a donor-funded organization. And so also, if you feel compelled to help us financially, we also have a donate page on our website.
Awesome. Well, perfect. Adrian, thanks so much for coming on the show, and everyone out there, we'll see you all next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.